Launched during a time of economic optimism, London won the bid to host the 30th Olympiad in 2005. This was supposed to be a euphoric moment for an optimistic Britain, but as 2012 approached, the nation was in the midst of austerity with a new coalition government. Despite the nation's precarious position, London 2012 was a huge success. As we approach its 10th anniversary, after Brexit and in the middle of a global pandemic, the opening ceremony, in particular, is often pointed to as the last great British moment. A twee cottage, village cricket, and a maypole set a quaint British scene, welcoming visitors for the opening ceremony on the 27th of July. Green and Pleasant Land, the ceremony's opening sequence, was Oscar-winning director Danny Boyle's unique approach to welcoming in the Olympic Games. Rather than guests entering an empty arena, Boyle wanted to display a slow-moving, picturesque snapshot of British rural life. This was a key move that set the narrative tone for the creative direction, setting it apart from the usual pageantry of Olympics opening ceremonies. With rumours of a Teletubbies-like set and animal cruelty creating the usual British cynicism in the build-up, the ceremony was widely celebrated and described as a love letter to Britain. Guardian columnist Jonathan Freedland neatly captured the nation's mood. So used to British irony and detachment, it felt refreshing to witness an unembarrassed positive case for this country. However, looking back at it through the gloom of the post-Brexit era, a hazy nostalgia has corrupted the memory of some parts of British society. This is a nostalgia that looks back at London 2012 with a disregard for the political context the Games took place within. The 2011 London riots were just the year before, with genuine concerns that London wouldn't be able to safely host the Games. These were the largest uprisings the nation had seen in decades, with protests starting in Tottenham after Mark Duggan was killed by the police. In the years since, it has become increasingly clear that this was the last straw for the community after growing racial tensions and a mistrust of the police, along with the economic decline under the early years of Conservative-led austerity. Just a year before, large protests also took place led by students, responding to the trebling of university tuition fees. This was one of the most controversial policies of the new coalition government, with students occupying the headquarters of the Conservative Party to express their dismay. It was clear that this was a government looking to make cuts regardless of the consequences. Even though the slogan for the Games was "Inspire a Generation," David Cameron's government was not in a similarly forward-looking mood. Within this context, the Olympics was looking like an unnecessary celebration as the government neglected communities across the country. London 2012 was described as the austerity games, with belief heading into the games almost absent. Opening the ceremony with the Green and Pleasant Land was a reassuring way to begin the Olympics, casting aside the anxieties of the time. Whilst not the intention of Danny Boyle, it also provided a convenient platform for some to overlook the difficult socio-political issues of the time.
Along with the political uncertainty in the lead up to the Games, the British public were anxious to see how London 2012 would compare to Beijing 2008, as it was widely seen as a strong representation of a confident China. In contrast, the design of London's Olympic Stadium was seen to be underwhelming and came to represent these anxieties. It was a lightweight technological solution, symbolic of the austerity games. In principle, the idea to have a demountable modular stadium is a worthy one. However, the elevation was formed by a simple porous truss, with the underside of the stands visible behind, creating a structure lacking in presence. This was a mediocre use of the tropes associated with high-tech architecture, and is symbolic of a nation that had little desire to build a more engaging Olympic stadium. These feelings of insecurity were further heightened when comparisons were made with the Bird's Nest. Tom Dykhoff, a British architectural critic, even went as far to say that comparing the two stadiums in the future will be a cunning indicator of the decline of the West and the rise of the East. Beyond the stadium design, there were also fears that London 2012's opening ceremony would not live up to its predecessor. Beijing's opening ceremony was a comprehensive spectacle that intertwined China's rich cultural history, alongside its emergence as a world leader. Underlying these fears was a sense of post-imperial anxiety, where Britain was still unsure of its global position over a decade after the formal end of its empire. Meanwhile, an emerging China was able to present a confident, forward-looking face to the world. Pandemonium, arguably the ceremony's most memorable section, cast aside its fears and stirred the emotions, introducing the chaos and dynamism of the Industrial Revolution. Led by the actor Kenneth Branagh, representing Britain's most famous engineer, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, a dramatic scene change from the green and pleasant land began, with drummers creating a visceral atmosphere. Workers emerged from the land, upending Bristol from its image of kitsch and twee to a gritty, people-led transformation as they constructed chimneys and other industrial symbols. This was a different approach to our opening ceremony. It was not just a song and dance with caricatures of traditional dress, but instead a literal storytelling of Britain's history. It was a narrative-based approach that brought together the imagined community of our nation directly before our eyes. Jackie Kay, a Scottish poet and novelist, described Boyle's approach as creating a new kind of opening ceremony, a concept ceremony. With Boyle's background in filmmaking, the ceremony was filmed with a human touch, ignoring the usual grand formations and pageantry. Most shots were close to the volunteers, showing off their choreographed empowering movements, inspired by industrial processes. At the centre of the stadium, workers cast an iron ring, before it was hoisted aloft and joined by 4 others, forming the iconic Olympic rings. Creating a sense of awe, we are left the idea of something much bigger. From the Industrial Revolution to London hosting the Olympic Games, it is the people of Britain who have brought us to this moment. Importantly, the creative team were keen to stress the impact of the progressive forces that have built Britain throughout this sequence. The suffragettes, members of the Windrush generation, the Dry Crusades, and a group of early kings and queens represented a broad section of communities, placing them firmly within our national story. The NHS was suitably celebrated with its own 12-minute section. This was not a false sense of inclusivity, but an honest snapshot of the nation. The commitment to the people of Britain was told not just through the ceremony's narrative, but also through the energy of the 7,500 volunteers. They came from far and wide with no prior experience, creating a genuine connection to the performance. There were, however, political pressures in how Britain was going to portray itself to the world, and Boyle was clear that this would not be left to politicians. Jeremy Hunt, then the Olympics and Culture Secretary, wanted to cut it down or even entirely remove the NHS sequence. Boyle made an ultimatum to the Secretary of State, saying that if the NHS sequence was to be cut, he would walk away from the performance along with all of the volunteers. It was this commitment, the inclusive values, that made the ceremony what it was. For all would need to be honest about the political context in the lead up to the Games, the ceremony itself was hugely successful and generally powerful. That is, however, due to the commitment to the progressive stories of Britain's history and its people, not an uncritical hazy version of nostalgia. Its success was so far-reaching that Danny Boyle was offered a knighthood. However, he turned it down, saying, "I'm very proud to be an equal citizen, and I think that's what the opening ceremony was actually about."
The ceremony's final major section was a roll call of the nation's popular culture, celebrating music, fashion and film, centred around a young love story to bring in the party atmosphere. From the 60s through to the present day, iconic British culture was reeled off, striking a balance between globally known hits to the more subversive edges of British music. The early 2010s, however, was a transitional point in cutting-edge British music. Dubstep and grime had entered their pop phases, with the indie scene slowly tailing off. The era was therefore represented by songs from Emeli Sandé, Amy Winehouse and Tinie Tempah, with Dizzee Rascal on stage to perform his 2009 #1 single, Bonkers. Even though Dizzee Rascal was arguably past producing his best music, it was a strong statement for a local artist to represent the grime scene on the international stage. The section culminated with a thank you to Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, bringing the culture of the past 50 years into the digital era. Even though this was the section to celebrate the nation's present and future, doing so by recounting the nation's greatest hits left a retrospective feel. Which generation was this supposed to inspire? The Olympic Park is now undergoing huge commercial redevelopment, and the remnants of the student protests and London riots are still felt today. The generation that was supposed to be inspired by London 2012 are now officially the first generation since the 1800s to not expect better living standards than the one before them. Was 2012 a moment of hubris, distracting us all from the incoming challenges of economic inequality, Brexit and Scottish independence? After all, this was a symbolic event, and for all of Danny Boyle's efforts in showing us what a progressive Britain could look like, political realities have rarely come close to this vision. Unfortunately, the only generation the ceremony has truly inspired is an older one that clings onto the grand, fixed narratives of Britishness. At the time, this was a radical retelling of our story, but is now used by some as a lazy shorthand for a confused post-imperial Britishness. After Brexit and with the impending breakdown of the Union, maybe this will be remembered more soberly, looked back upon as the last unifying moment for the United Kingdom.